"Master, I can make your son walk again," said the street kid to the millionaire. These 8 words would destroy everything Robert Mitchell believed about medicine, hope, and the invisible walls between the powerful and the powerless. But what happened next would leave even the most skeptical viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about miracles. Central Park erupted with typical Saturday chaos as joggers dodged families with strollers, hot dog vendors shouted prices, and street musicians competed for attention with their melodies echoing off concrete paths. Robert Mitchell sat on a weathered bench near Bethesda Fountain, his $5,000 Armani suit and platinum Rolex marking him as one of Manhattan's elite real estate moguls. Beside him, 11-year-old Christopher Mitchell remained motionless in his custom wheelchair, absently gripping a baseball glove that hadn't touched a ball since the night that changed everything. The boy's green eyes held that hollow emptiness that comes when dreams die slowly, the resigned look of someone who had stopped believing in tomorrow. For 18 months since the accident, Robert had become a man possessed by one impossible mission. He had flown Christopher to neurological specialists in Geneva, hired the most expensive physical therapists money could buy, even converted an entire floor of their penthouse into a medical facility that rivaled most hospitals. Every consultation ended with the same devastating verdict delivered by doctors in $1,000 suits with practiced sympathy in their voices. "We should head home, buddy," Robert murmured, checking his watch as afternoon shadows stretched across the park. Christopher nodded with that soul-crushing acceptance that had replaced his once bright personality. But as Robert began pushing the wheelchair toward Fifth Avenue, a small figure emerged from behind the fountain's stone angels, moving through the weekend crowd with deliberate purpose. What Robert discovered about this boy would shatter everything he thought he understood about healing, but the truth about who this child really was would leave him speechless. The kid appeared to be no more than 9 years old, barefoot and wearing clothes that screamed street survival, but his dark eyes carried an intensity that made grown adults stop and stare. He weaved through the Saturday crowd like he owned the park, approaching their bench with steps that seemed both cautious and determined. Robert's businessman instincts kicked in immediately, his face hardening with the practiced dismissal he used on panhandlers and street performers. He prepared to wave the boy away with a sharp gesture, but something stopped him cold. This child didn't extend a dirty palm for coins or offer to shine shoes for pocket change. Instead, he planted himself directly in front of them, straightened his thin shoulders, and spoke with a voice that carried impossible confidence for someone so young. "Master, I can make your son walk again," he declared, his words slicing through the park's ambient noise like a surgeon's blade cutting through silence. The statement hung in the air between them, audacious and unthinkable, while joggers continued their routes and children's laughter echoed from the nearby playground. Robert's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief, to something approaching rage in the span of 3 heartbeats. "What the hell did you just say?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to make nearby families glance their way nervously. But the boy didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't mumble an apology or lower his gaze like most kids would when confronted by an angry millionaire. "I said I can help him walk," he repeated with even more conviction than before. "If you'll give me the chance to show you." Christopher's wheelchair creaked as he leaned forward, his eyes widening as he stared at this strange, confident child who spoke of impossible things like they were simple facts. Something flickered in Christopher's expression that Robert hadn't seen in 18 months, a spark of curiosity that had been dormant since the night their world shattered. But what the boy said next would make Robert question everything he thought he knew about medicine, miracles, and the power of believing in the impossible. Robert's corporate instincts exploded into full defensive mode as he rose from the bench, his 6-foot frame towering over the small figure like a skyscraper casting shadows on the street below. "Listen here, you little con artist," he snarled, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms filled with powerful men. "Do you have any clue how many world-renowned specialists have made that exact promise? Do you comprehend how many medical degrees, how many cutting-edge facilities, how many Nobel Prize winners have looked my son in the eye and sworn they could fix him?" His voice crescendoed with each word, drawing stares from weekend park visitors who recognized the sound of wealth and power being challenged by something they couldn't understand. "And you, some barefoot street rat who probably can't even spell rehabilitation, think you can deliver what teams of genius doctors couldn't?" The words came out like bullets, each one designed to destroy the boy's ridiculous confidence, and sent him scurrying back to whatever alley he'd crawled out of. But the child remained absolutely motionless, his bare feet planted on the concrete like roots that had grown deep into the earth itself. His young face showed no trace of fear, intimidation, or the shame that Robert expected to see flooding across his features. "Yes, sir," he said with a simplicity that was somehow more powerful than any shouting match. "Because I don't need expensive equipment or fancy degrees to see what they missed." The unexpected composure in his voice left Robert momentarily speechless, like he'd swung a hammer at a wall, only to watch it bounce back harmlessly. "Dad?" Christopher whispered, his voice barely audible above the park's weekend symphony of sounds and motion. "Dad, please." Robert looked down at his son and felt something crack inside his chest, not quite breaking but definitely shifting under pressure. It wasn't just hope shining in Christopher's eyes. It was the first sign of genuine engagement he'd shown since the accident. The first time he'd looked truly alive instead of simply existing in a world that had forgotten how to include him. But what Christopher said next would force Robert to make a choice that would change all three of their lives forever. "What if he's telling the truth?" Christopher asked, his voice carrying a weight that seemed impossible for someone so young to bear. "What if this time it's different?" The question hung between father and son like a bridge neither had dared to cross since that terrible night when everything changed, connecting them to a possibility that felt both dangerous and desperately necessary. Robert felt his carefully constructed walls of skepticism beginning to crack under the pressure of his son's pleading eyes. The businessman found himself caught in an impossible moment, trapped between his logical mind that screamed this was obviously a scam, and his breaking heart that could see his son coming back to life right before his eyes. "Christopher, we can't build false hope on the promises of street kids," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow and defensive rather than protective. "But what if it's not false?" Christopher pressed, his voice gaining strength with each word. "What if everyone else was wrong and he's right?" Turning back to the boy with reluctance that felt like moving through quicksand, Robert heard himself asking the question that would change everything. "What's your name, kid?" The child's serious expression softened slightly, revealing just a hint of the vulnerability that lived beneath his impossible confidence. "Tyler," he replied. "Tyler Washington." Robert studied the boy's face with the same intensity he used to evaluate million-dollar deals, searching for signs of deception, manipulation, or the calculated emptiness that marked professional con artists. But all he found was an unsettling combination of youth and wisdom that made no logical sense, like looking at a child who had somehow lived through experiences that should have taken decades to accumulate. "And exactly how do you plan to accomplish this miracle, Tyler?" Robert asked, his voice carrying both skepticism and a curiosity he didn't want to admit to feeling. What Tyler said next would either prove him to be a delusional street kid with dangerous fantasies or reveal something about healing that the medical establishment had completely missed. Tyler's smile appeared slowly, not with the cocky arrogance Robert expected from a kid making impossible claims, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had walked through hell and emerged with knowledge that couldn't be taught in any classroom. "First, I need him to remember what running felt like before everyone told him it was impossible," he explained, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality that seemed to reach directly into Christopher's mind. "Then I help his body remember what his soul never forgot." The explanation should have sounded like complete nonsense, the kind of mystical garbage that desperate parents fell for when real medicine failed them. But something in Tyler's tone suggested depths of experience that seemed impossible for someone his age, like he was speaking from a place of personal knowledge rather than wishful thinking. Robert was about to dismiss the boy's words as elaborate fantasy when he caught sight of Christopher's expression and felt his breath catch in his throat. His son was leaning forward in his wheelchair with an intensity Robert hadn't witnessed since before the accident, hanging on Tyler's every word like they contained the secret to unlocking a prison he'd been trapped in for 18 months. Christopher's eyes were bright with something Robert had almost forgotten existed, a spark of genuine hope that seemed to illuminate his entire face from within. The transformation was so dramatic that for a moment Robert wondered if this strange boy had already begun working some kind of impossible magic. Robert ran a trembling hand through his perfectly styled hair and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. Not quite breaking, but definitely cracking under pressure he hadn't realized was building. It wasn't Tyler's promise that was swaying him. It was the miracle he could already see beginning in his son. The way Christopher seemed to come alive in the presence of this confident, mysterious child. "You get 1 hour," Robert said finally, his voice rough with emotions he didn't want to examine. 1 hour, and if nothing happens, you disappear forever. But what Tyler revealed about his own past would make Robert realize that some encounters are never really coincidences. Tyler nodded without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this exact response all along, like someone who had learned to read the desperation hidden behind parental skepticism. "That's all I need to show you what's possible," he said, already scanning the area around them with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to making magic happen in less than ideal circumstances. "But we'll need a quieter space, somewhere your son can focus without distractions." 20 minutes later, they had relocated to a secluded area near the Shakespeare Garden, away from the main walking paths and weekend crowds that filled Central Park with noise and movement. Tyler had gathered what most people would consider random debris, fallen branches arranged in patterns that seemed to follow some invisible blueprint, smooth stones placed at precise intervals, and an old piece of canvas spread on the ground like a makeshift therapy space that looked nothing like any medical facility Robert had ever seen. "This is your cutting-edge medical equipment?" Robert asked, unable to keep the sarcasm from dripping through his voice as he gestured toward Tyler's improvised setup. "My son needs real therapy, not some street performance disguised as treatment." Tyler didn't look up from his careful arrangements, continuing to adjust the placement of stones and branches with the precision of someone following instructions that existed only in his own mind. "Your son needs to remember who he was before everyone convinced him of who he couldn't be," the boy replied quietly. "These aren't medical tools. They're memory triggers." Christopher had been watching everything with the fascination of someone witnessing genuine magic for the first time in their life, his eyes tracking Tyler's every movement like he was afraid to miss a single detail. When Tyler finally approached his wheelchair and knelt down to Christopher's eye level, the boy's expression shifted to one of intense concentration, mixed with something that looked dangerously close to hope. But what Tyler asked next would begin a process that even the most expensive doctors in the world had declared impossible. "Tell me about the last time you remember feeling truly fast," Tyler said, his voice gentle but direct as he searched Christopher's eyes for something that had been buried under months of medical pessimism. "Not walking, not standing, but flying across the ground like your legs were made for speed." Christopher's face scrunched with concentration as he reached back into memories that felt like they belonged to someone else, someone who existed before wheelchairs and hospital corridors became his entire world. "I was playing baseball," Christopher whispered, his voice growing stronger as the memory took hold. "Bottom of the 9th, bases loaded, and I hit the ball harder than I'd ever hit anything in my life. I ran so fast around those bases that my feet barely touched the ground." Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone that seemed to catch the afternoon light in impossible ways, like it contained its own source of illumination. He placed the stone in Christopher's palm, gently closing the boy's fingers around it with the careful touch of someone who understood that healing often begins with the smallest gestures. "Hold this tight and feel that memory," Tyler instructed, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "Don't think about what the doctor said. Don't think about what everyone believes is impossible. Just remember how it felt when your body knew exactly what it was meant to do." Christopher closed his eyes, his grip tightening around the mysterious stone, and something extraordinary began to happen that would leave even the most skeptical viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about the limits of human potential. His breathing deepened, his shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since the accident, his face showed not the strain of trying to force his body to cooperate, but the peaceful concentration of someone accessing a memory that had never truly been lost. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the most powerful medicine comes from the most unexpected places. Tyler closed his own eyes and began speaking in a voice barely above a whisper, his words painting pictures that seemed to reach directly into Christopher's mind and soul. "You're back on that baseball field," he said, his voice carrying the rhythm of someone weaving a spell with nothing but belief and determination. "The sun is warm on your back, the grass is soft under your feet, and your legs are strong, carrying you forward like they were designed for this exact moment." Tears began to slide down Christopher's cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness, frustration, or the hopeless grief that had become his constant companion. These were tears of recognition, of remembering something precious that everyone had told him was gone forever. "I can feel it," Christopher whispered, his voice filled with wonder that seemed to transform the very air around them. I can actually feel my feet touching the ground, feel my muscles remembering how to work. Robert's breath caught in his throat as he watched his son's face undergo a transformation that no amount of money had been able to purchase in 18 months of desperate searching. Something was happening that defied every medical opinion, every expert diagnosis, every crushing verdict that had been delivered by the most respected names in neurology. "How is this possible?" he asked Tyler, his voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the city. Tyler opened his eyes and looked directly at Robert with an intensity that seemed far too old for his young face. "I'm not doing anything he can't do himself," Tyler replied, his words carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I'm just helping him remember that his body knows how to be whole, even when everyone else has forgotten." The session continued for another 30 minutes, with Tyler guiding Christopher through exercises that seemed to reconnect him with sensations and movements that every specialist had declared permanently lost. But what Robert discovered about Tyler's own past would explain everything and change their lives forever. As Christopher worked with Tyler's improvised equipment, something miraculous began to unfold that would leave viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about healing and hope. The boy who hadn't moved his legs in 18 months suddenly shifted his weight in a way that put actual pressure on muscles that doctors had written off as dead tissue. It was a small movement, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't watching with the desperate attention of a parent who had given up hope. But it was real and measurable and impossible. "Did you see that?" Christopher exclaimed, his voice cracking with emotions that had been building for over a year. "Dad, I actually moved my leg. I felt it respond." Robert felt his knees go weak as he witnessed something that every medical expert had sworn could never happen, something that violated everything he thought he understood about spinal injuries and neurological damage. Tyler simply nodded as if he'd been expecting this result from the very beginning, like someone who had seen this particular miracle happen before. "This is just the beginning," Tyler said quietly, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had walked this exact path himself. "Your body remembers more than you think it does. We just have to be patient and keep reminding it who you really are." As the session wound down, Christopher was exhausted but glowing with an energy Robert hadn't seen since before their world collapsed, his face transformed by the kind of hope that can only come from experiencing the impossible firsthand. When Tyler began packing up his simple equipment, Robert found himself asking the question that had been building in his mind for the past hour. "Tyler, where did you learn to do what you do?" The boy was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally answered, his voice carried the weight of a story that would explain everything. "I learned from someone who saved my life when I was in a wheelchair just like Christopher's," Tyler said simply. "Someone who refused to let me believe that broken meant permanently worthless." The weeks that followed would bring challenges that Robert could never have imagined when he first encountered the barefoot boy in Central Park. There would be skeptical doctors who couldn't explain Christopher's improvement, concerned staff members who questioned Tyler's presence in their world, and social barriers that seemed designed to keep street kids and millionaires in separate universes. But there would also be progress that defied every medical prediction and transformed both father and son in ways that money could never have purchased. What Robert learned during those life-changing weeks was that healing doesn't always come packaged in expensive medical facilities or prestigious degrees. Sometimes the most powerful medicine is found in the hands of someone who has walked the same dark path and emerged with the unshakable belief that miracles happen when we're brave enough to trust in them. Tyler had fought his own battle against a body that everyone said would never work properly again, and he understood something about hope that no textbook could teach. The story of the millionaire's son and the street kid would become whispered legend in rehabilitation centers across the country, shared among families who had been told to abandon hope and accept permanent limitations. Medical professionals would debate the science behind Christopher's recovery, but for those who witnessed it firsthand, the explanation was simpler than any complex theory. Sometimes healing happens when someone who truly understands suffering refuses to let you surrender to it. Christopher Mitchell would go on to walk again, then run, and eventually return to the baseball field where his journey back to wholeness had begun in his memory. But perhaps the most profound transformation happened in Robert himself, who learned that the most valuable things in life can't be purchased with wealth or influence, only received with humility and gratitude from those brave enough to offer them. What do you think about this incredible story of hope triumphing over impossible odds? Have you ever experienced a moment when help arrived from the most unexpected source? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this touched your heart, please share it with others who might need a reminder that miracles still happen when we least expect them. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories that will restore your faith in the power of human connection and the magic that exists when we refuse to give up on each other.